Stop using Microsoft products or other apps to edit your images. If you have any kind of image that needs resizing, altering, merging, adding in text, or changing in any way, you should be using GIMP. Why? Microsoft bad, GIMP good. Adobe good, GIMP free, Adobe expensive. GIMP is a free, trusted image editing software that is an incredibly powerful tool. In this video, I'll show you the basics of how to use GIMP for common image editing needs. Okay, so let's say we want to crop and resize this image. So install GIMP and then load it up, latest version ideally. To get images into GIMP, there's two main ways of doing it. So you can grab the file and just click and drag it in, and it's there. To get rid of any kind of file, you just click there and it's gone. Great. Or you can just click open, navigate your way to it, and then click open. And there it is. Doesn't matter either way. So next thing, cropping. So you want to go to the rectangle select tool. This is a great general select. You just click and drag to select how much you want, and we'll explain why that's important in a minute. But just while we're here, you can also do some other bits like fix the aspect ratio and other cool things to modify your select tool. So let's say we just want this much of the image. So I clicked and dragged. You can modify your selection. It doesn't have to keep as it is. So once you click on it, you can click and drag at the corners, and I think at the top as well, and you can manually change exactly how much you want to be in the image. Once you're happy with your selection, what we can do is Control C and Control V. Now what this has done, if you come down here into the layers mode, is it's gone this image, it's taken the selection and put it into a new layer. So the way we make that fully into a new layer, because it's just a floating selection at the moment, is right click and to new layer. And this means it's a fully interactable full new layer. So just to explain the layers, there is the image or the canvas, which is the confines of the box you see there. And within that canvas are layers, and they come in a hierarchy. So at the moment, this layer is on top of this layer. You can make layers visible or not visible as much as you want, and layer management is one of the key aspects of GIMP. So seeing as we only want this much, we can just get rid of our other layer. So we just right click and go to delete layer. Now as you can see, we've got what we want, but we've still got this weird grayed out box, and that's because the canvas isn't appropriately sized to the layer. So the quickest way, I think, of changing this is you go to Image, go to Fit Canvas to Layers, and boom, there we are. The canvas is now at the size of the image we want. I'll just Control Z to show another way of doing that. If you go on to Scale Image, you can manually change the size of the image here. That works fine. Personally, I prefer to just fit canvas to layers because it's much easier. Or you can do canvas size. You know, there's multiple options, but fit canvas to layers is just the quickest and easiest method. So now we've got the selection that we want. What if we wanted to say resize this? Say it's going to be a profile picture and they've got a limit on file size and you need to make it a lot smaller. Well, for that we would use the scale tool, which is Shift S. So just to explain the way these groupings work, you can click on the tool, or you can right click to select exactly which tool as well within each tool setting. So at the moment we want scale. There's other ones, so here you can right click and then you can get the alignment mode. If it let me, yeah, you can do multiple different select types, but for the moment don't worry too much about that. We're just going to scale the image. So now we've got our scale tool selected, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the image, and this brings up this menu which controls the scale. We've got multiple different options. At the moment they're linked, and linked means it's got a fixed aspect ratio. So as you can see, if I try and increase the height, the width changes as well, and same for the width, the height changes. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can undo it. You could undo it, and then you could manually change the height and the width without doing that. One thing to note, scale is lossy, which means if I go make it really, really, really tiny, scale it, and then scale it back up, you can see what's happened. Suddenly, it's very pixelated, and that's because we've made it tiny, it's adjusted to those pixels, and then we've blown it back up again. So it's suddenly lost a lot of the information. So when you're scaling, you need to watch out for this and be careful that you're not losing information along the way. But let's just say we want to scale it down a bit. So we'll scale it down to there, why not? Scale it, and now you can see we've got the same problem as before. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Image, Fit Canvas to Layers, and suddenly it's adjusted. But as you can see, we're kind of a way away from it now, and we can't really see what's happening. So if you press Control and then scroll, you can change your zoom. And then with the scroll, just scrolling normally will bring it back into focus again. You can scroll in on parts of the image, scroll out, change here where you're sitting on it, but naturally it tries to center it for you, which is really helpful. So let's say that's our final image done. How do we then export what we've got here? Well, we go to File, we go to Export As. I think this is one of the best parts of GIMP because you can change your file name. So we can say image1 done, but here's file name isn't the important bit. What is important is the dot bit. Now if you're not familiar with the dot bit, it essentially gives you the file type. So Microsoft Word is docx, I think. Images are normally JPEG or PNG, but with GIMP you can change it to be whatever you want. So JPEG is pretty standard, but quite often you'll want to do PNG. PNG means that there's a lot less compression and it records a lot more information about the image, whereas the JPEG you can think is a very simple form of the image. So for this one we just want JPEG and we'll click Export. You can also modify where it's stored if you want to as well. That's quite simple. I'm not going to show you how to do that. And then you just, after you're done with it, click Export. And now here's something interesting. This comes up for the JPEG menu. This is one of the reasons why JPEG is a slight advantage, because you can change the quality. Normally you want to leave most of these settings all alone. Sometimes if you're exporting something and you still want it to be a JPEG but without the compression, move the quality back up to 100. Personally, I prefer about 90 because the information lost isn't very important information and it will dramatically reduce the file size, which is very helpful. After that, we want to click Export, and there we go, it's exported. And check in the folder, and there's our image done. And it's just like that easy. So just to recap, we have shown you how to move an image in, how to resize it, how to crop it, and then how to export it. So another common thing people like to do is add in text to their images. Unfortunately, GIMP has a really easy way of doing this. So all you got to do is hop over, pick up the text tool, and just click and drag like before as we did with the selection, type in what you need. Great. Except for the fact that the text box is not appropriately sized to the text. Fortunately, GIMP has a very easy way of fixing this. You just click that there and it automatically snaps over to it. Now that text is very small and perhaps not in the location we want, so let's fix the size first. So select the text as you normally would, Control A, select it however you want, should be pretty standard, and then you can just increase the size by clicking here. You can change it to pixels, inches, millimeters, whatever you need, but pixels really should work fine for most of what you're doing. If you wanted to change the font at all, top in here, there's a couple that's fine. You can add in your own fonts, whatever you need, Arial, why not, all the options there for adding in your fonts. Now, how do we go about moving it? Because it's not exactly where we perhaps would want. So you'd select the Move tool, and then you can just click and move, oh, not that layer, this one, and move it to where you want it to be, wherever you want. And that's the easy way of adding in text. And as you can see, it doesn't quite stand out, and I might show you how to do an outline in another video at a later point. So let's say we wanted to change the colour. So we would hop over here, you've got to select it first, that's an important bit, and click on colour. And that brings up the colour menu. So now you can say we want it in red, you can move it into the red, say you wanted a nice green one, you know, it's change the darkness, the brightness. This menu is really fun, just play around with it until you get the colour you need. Let's go for a nice dark green, there we go. And there we are, our text is now dark green. I know that doesn't look very good, but this is purely for demonstration, so that's fine. Next thing I want to talk about is colour adjustments. That's another key reason people use image editing software. So you've got to select the right layer. Notice how I switched from the text layer to the image layer, because if we do what we're about to do next, we'd only change the text layer. This is one of the things I pointed out in the last part. layer management is a key aspect of GIMP, and you don't want to be applying effects to the wrong layer because then you won't have the desired effect. So I think most of everybody's lighting needs could actually be done from this color menu. So just to go through it simply, color balance, that's your amount of red, green, and blue. Looks a bit weird, but if you wanted to change that kind of effect, that's fine, you can do that there. Another interesting one is color temperature. So this is correcting for sort of perhaps some of the lighting in the original image. So you can make it sort of a warmer image or a colder image, depending on the sort of lighting that's appropriate. So this looks way more summery now, despite the snow. And as you can see, it looks like it was taken in summer when this was winter, when this was captured. Another interesting effect is hue chroma. This may take a while depending on your computer, see how it cycles through, and you can change interesting effects there. Perhaps the most useful would be the lighting, though it doesn't allow for much distinction compared to some of the options we're going to look at in a bit. Next, I think, is saturation. Now this one's actually quite useful. So if you want a nice black and white image, you just pop the scale to 0 and suddenly you've got a nice black and white image. Increase it, all the colours look a lot bigger. Shadows and highlights. Now this is an interesting one. So you can increase the shadows, increase the highlights. Notice how that produces quite an interesting effect at the back there with the sky. Adjusting the white point changes the overall colour. Last one I want to talk about is brightness contrast. This is another really handy one. Well, it's as it describes the brightness and the contrast. So brightness is how bright everything is. It sounds silly to say it. And then contrast is how sharp the image is. So as you can see, that doesn't look very good at all, but if you wanted to go for a lower contrast, say you're trying to replicate perhaps a faded photograph, you might adjust that setting. But what I really want to show is that GIMP has the possibilities of doing all your lighting, image editing needs through most of these options without having to mess around with very much more. And this is all very simple, and you can just fiddle around as you need to get what you're after. And then another interesting part of the GIMP is these filters, but there's some really interesting ones, say like artistic cartoon. And that one's very subtle. You can see how some of the textures have changed slightly, but it's quite a subtle one. Let's go for something a little bit more bold. There we go. So you can see that this has really changed the image, and the filters are quite fun to mess around with, and there might be one that's actually what you're after, but I don't tend to use these as much, but then I'm not really interested in editing images in these ways, but there's loads to be done here that's really helpful. What I wanted to do as well is come down to the layer menu and show this again, because I didn't do it very much in detail in the first part. Visibility is really handy, but you can also adjust the hierarchy. Say you want to move this hills below the other one, you'd select the layer and then you can click and drag, or use these two little arrows to move it up and down, and there we go, it's underneath the image, and above and below. And as you can see, this is really useful for making things visible, changing how you're working, and when you want to work on one specific layer, and when you don't. Sometimes you just want to make everything invisible except for one layer, and other times you want to see the whole picture. So for this part of the video, I just wanted to record myself talking over me doing some editing. Now the aim here is to remove 2 pieces of toast and just put one back on the plate. And in doing that, I'll take you through some of the steps. So here I'm trying to use the scissor select tool, which you can see I've got selected there, but something's gone wrong, so I've used the rectangle select to remove it. And I thought this was worth including just because that's the best way I've found to get rid of anything that you didn't want selected if you accidentally selected it. So as you can see, I've just zoomed in, and now I'm going to go around finer points of selecting the piece of toast we're going to duplicate and then reinsert back into the image. And I'm just left clicking with the mouse, so you can click to create new points, or you can click along the line to bring them in for a much tighter fit, as you can see. Sometimes it's nice to do these big round points as well, as you can see that I'm doing there. And then I've clicked in the middle to create it into a selectable layer. And once it's a selectable layer, you can then Control-C and Control-V to create it into that selecting floaty layer that we talked about in the first part of this. So now we need to get rid of the background. So I'm going to be using the clone tool for this. Now this is the first time we've really talked about tools. And as you can see, there's this big sort of outline, which is where the tool is active. So the way this one works is you press Control and click on part of the image, and this is sort of where the tool's going to copy from. And as you can see now, that when I left click, after control clicking once, it's now going to paint over the new area with the part of the old area that I had originally selected. So this is great for getting rid of little imperfections in your image. I mean, I'm using this to sort of create a clean plate, but this could be used to remove a spot, a light artifact, pretty much anything, really. It's a really handy way of removing parts of the image, and it's much faster than selecting part of it, duplicating it, spreading it out again, and when you've got something like this plate, it's perfect. As you can see, it still looks very smudgy, and I will sort that out towards the end, but as a rough, very quick measure, it's very effective at removing it. As you can see, we got a bit of the plate there, and you have to be careful because you can't keep left clicking down forever because it will just copy the image, so you end up accidentally duplicating parts of it, as you can see I've just done as well. So now I'm just duplicating some crumbs to make the plate look more realistic. As you can see, it doesn't look quite right, but I find the right sort of colour and start using that, and it starts to look a little bit better as it goes on. Again, this is a rough job, so if you really wanted to be careful with it, you could do a lot more. So I'm reintroducing the toast from the other layer, and now I'm moving it into the middle using the Move tool. Now I'm going to use the Rotate. We used the scale last time, and this time we're going to rotate. As you can see, it's important to get the right layer, as I just showed you there. Now we've rotated it, I'm going to switch to the Blur tool, and what that does is it sort of removes any contrast between the edges of this layer and the next one down. As you can see, it wasn't super effective, but it does sort of smooth the edges, which makes it much more believable for blending things in. As you can see, I'm going to try a couple other bits, like the Erase tool. That's often very helpful for removing black edges when you haven't got quite the outline you were after. And it also provides a nice gradient, which makes it much more believable. As you can see, I just take a little bit off there. For much stronger blending, the Smudge tool is also useful. This one actually grabs a lot more of the image though, and is a bit more rough. The Blur tool is quite subtle, and as you can see on the smudge on the left hand side of the toast, you've got a very blurry mess from what I did because I was rushing, and this isn't a full proper job. But as you can see, the more you mess around with it, the more you can get it to what you're after. But just to be aware that it is a lot stronger than the Blur, although you can change all the settings you need to in the left hand panel there with size, aspect ratio, angle. You can change everything you need there as well. As you can see, I'm using the clone tool just to add a couple more crumbs in elsewhere and just tidy up a little bit of the edges. You can spend as long as you want on this, and I actually, this is the part of GIMP I enjoy the most using, just messing around, creating silly images, not always duplicating toast, but it serves as an example for the kind of thing you could do. You could bring in a person, do anything you need to. It can be used for merging photos together, making them look nice, creating art, or just tidying up odd family photos or friends or whatever. As you can see, actually, the Smudge tool I found to be really helpful with sorting out the borders from the clone. That was actually the most useful thing I used it for, I think, in this. And as you can see, if I spent a lot more time on this, it would remove any of those nasty gradients or smudgy marks that is present on the image. And there we go, that's our duplicated piece of toast. And now I'm just using the bucket tool just to fill in the little corners so it looks a bit better, and the bucket tool is quite nice as well. So hopefully I've convinced you to at least try GIMP. It's free to use, it's trusted software, you can download it at gimp.org. I've got the link in the description below. Please install it and give it a go. It's really worthwhile, it's such a powerful tool, it's being updated all the time, and it is the best free way to edit images.